Monetary Policy Committee unanimously in its decision has decided to hold rates, all parameters retaining MPR at 27.25%, 50%, I beg your pardon, asymmetric corridor plus 500 and minus 100 basis points retained. Liquidity ratio retained at 30%. Well, let's do a quick analysis of what we've heard today from the CBN, and joining me for more on this is the founder and Group Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much. I'm sure you were listening to the governor of the Apex Bank answering questions, and of course after his speech. Now, you said this yesterday when we spoke off camera that you had the belief that they were going to hold rates. Why did you think they were going to do that, and what do you make of this outcome?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My assumptions we are not far from what the CBN governor. You look at global economic environment, global political environment, the return of Trump as the president of the U.S., the policy pronouncements he has made, the expected implication of that on crude oil prices, crude oil demand, the expected implication of that on global interest rate environment. And then you come home and you look at the GDP figures, and you realize that the GDP figures are still very fragile. I mean, GDP growth is still fragile, because if you take out a few, 2 or 3 sectors that grew at up to 5%, the larger sectors saw relatively marginal growth. And then you also consider the fact that inflation is still high at 24.48%, bearing in mind that this is an additional increase above the price levels last year, because last year, 2024, was now used as a base year. And then you also look at other factors that the Monetary Policy Committee will consider, pressures on exchange rate. Can we now say confidently that the pressure on exchange has fully abated? So when you look at all these factors, you will end up with a decision that the most appropriate thing is to hold rates, watch and wait for the MBS to come up with a GDP figure, as well as wait further for the impact or implications of the policy pronouncements of the Donald Trump presidency in the U.S.
Well, it seems like the CBN governor pointed to so many positives. Exchange rates reserves at the moment, he says, it can even serve for like 9 months plus. He also talked about the stability in the foreign exchange market, talking about that disparity that we used to talk about. There's a bit of, it's getting better than what it used to be. And of course, moderation in the price of PMS. Looking at all of this, moving forward, Mr. Chukwu, what do you think with regards to inflation and the rebasing? It's like a two-in-one question. Your reaction to the inflation and rebasing, and also the positive signs that we see around some economic indicators.
Yes, Tolu, those positives are there, but they are not yet time for anybody to thump his chest. We've seen a narrowing of the differential between the primary market and official window. But also bear in mind that we're just coming out of a period when China accounts for about 23% of our total import, when the Chinese market was shut down. So in effect, for about 1 month, the demand for foreign exchange reduced by about 23 to 25%. So that ordinarily is expected to have had impact on the differential between the official window and the primary market window. We saw reserve grow above 40 billion just recently. It got down but about 39.4 billion, which simply means that despite the positive balance of trade, that we still have pressure points around the foreign exchange reserve, or the difference between capital inflow and capital mind. So in as much as, like I said, these positives, you talk about inflation rate, yes, he said the inflation is expected or has started moderating, but bear in mind that you're talking about almost 25% inflation rate on the base, on top of the inflation rate of last year, assuming that average inflation last year was in the region of 30%. because what they did was use last year's average as a base for measuring inflation going forward. If it was 30%, it simply means in January, between December 2023 and January 2025, average prices have increased by about 55%. By about 75%, by 55%, yes, about 55%. That's more than 50% increase. So it's still a very high inflation rate. That's not the target that we have. So having said that, the next aspect of your question is that, where do I see inflation going forward? Let's dwell on those factors that could trigger further inflationary pressure. One is food, or the price of food. If you look at the rebased GDP figures, food now contributes about 40% of the food basket, of the inflation basket, of the CPI, as against the 51% they used to account for. But then the part of it has now moved to restaurants and for those who are eating outside. You've seen a major shift in the share of that as it relates to the consumer price index. And then, so if you have increase in food prices, if we don't address the insecurity in the major food base of the country, and we move to the planting season, the planting season is going to start sometime in March, then you could see an uptick in inflation and food inflation above the 26.08% that was reported for the month of January. Other factors that could trigger inflationary pressures are the pass-through effects of the increase in telecommunication tariff. So telecommunication accounts for about 7% of the CPI index. So if the increase in tariff, by the time it takes full effect, you will also see inflationary pressure. So these are factors that will likely put pressures. On the converse, we've seen a moderation in the pump price of fuel, driven by one, lower crude prices, and two, some level of stability in the exchange rate. I think that might likely continue. We should expect that crude prices will moderate further as a result of effort by Donald Trump to push down crude prices. And if Naira strengthens further, then you should also have a salutary effect on pump prices. So while we're dealing with possible increase in food prices, already approved increase in telecommunication tariff, it will to some extent be counterbalanced by reduction in some expenditure heads like fuel. But the other pressures we have to deal with, rent increase and all that, and what transport increases and what have you. So, but in summary, we should expect that inflation rate will remain around 24 to maybe 27% this year. I don't expect inflation getting 30% this year.
In 1 minute, we just have 1 minute to wrap this up. I know we have a lot to talk about. The handshake between the monetary and the fiscal side, the CBN governor commended that. What do you also think? Do you think it's better than what we used to have before now?
Well, I think, yes, under the immediate past government of President Muhammadu Buhari, we saw the monetary authorities go into overdrive because the fiscal authority was in a doldrum. So today, at least, we have a Minister of Finance that is talking economic issues. I don't think we are still seeing enough harmony the way I want. And why do I say I'm not seeing enough harmony? But the key thing that some level of improvement is going on in terms of marrying the objective of the fiscal authorities with the objectives of the monetary authority. But let me tell you where the convergence is. The fiscal authority had just increased the federal government 2025 budget to 54.9 trillion naira. And that will largely reasonably be funded from other ways and means of borrowing, which will, if it's not funded by direct borrowing from local economy, it will inject liquidity into the economy, and that will put pressure on demand price levels. So, which is contrary to the efforts of the central bank to impose a 50% cash reserve ratio on deposit money banks as to suck out liquidity from the economy. The efforts of the central bank that borrowed about 25 trillion naira last year, or took out 25 trillion naira last year from the money market through OMO auctions and treasury-based auctions. So if on the one hand, the monetary authority is trying to tighten, well as the fiscal authority is implementing very, very expansionary fiscal policy, then we say that the level of harmony or harmonization we expect has not yet been achieved.
I must thank you so much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, and thanks for your patience. Founder, Group Chief Executive Officer, Cowrie Assets Management Limited. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you some other time.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time. Stay safe, get the cash.